My name is Evelyn, and I'm 28 years old. When I was 17, my mother kicked me out to make room for her real family, my stepfather and half-siblings. I built my life from nothing, created a successful tech startup, and finally found peace. Then last month, after 10 years of silence, my mother suddenly reappeared with an outstretched hand, demanding I pay for my half-siblings' college education because she discovered I'm now wealthy. The audacity of her request still leaves me breathless. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you've ever experienced family betrayal, hit that like and subscribe button. Sometimes sharing our painful stories helps others feel less alone. I grew up in a modest suburban neighborhood in Seattle, the only child of parents who seemed happy, at least through my childhood eyes. My dad worked as an electrical engineer at a local firm, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. I had a particularly close relationship with my father, who recognized and encouraged my interest in computers from an early age. "You've got a mind for puzzles, Evie," he would say as he taught me basic programming on our family computer. By the time I was 10, I was already building simple websites and games, much to my dad's delight. Everything changed when I was 12. I came home from school one day to find my parents sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, the air between them thick with tension. "Evelyn, we need to talk to you," my mother said, her voice unusually formal. "Your father and I have decided to get a divorce." The world I knew collapsed that day. Only later did I learn the truth. My mother had been having an affair with Richard, a wealthy real estate developer she had met at a school fundraiser. Richard was everything my father wasn't: flashy, ambitious, and dripping with money. He drove a Mercedes, wore custom suits, and lived in a mansion overlooking Lake Washington. The divorce was finalized quickly. The initial custody arrangement had me living primarily with my mother while seeing my dad on weekends. Mom moved us into Richard's enormous house just 3 months after the divorce. I hated everything about it: the cold marble floors, the furniture that looked too expensive to touch, and especially Richard with his perfect white teeth and condescending smile. "You'll adjust," my mother assured me, but I could already see the changes in her. Gone were her casual clothes and warm laugh, replaced by designer outfits and a restrained chuckle that seemed designed not to draw too much attention. She started getting her hair done weekly, had her nails professionally manicured, and adopted a whole new vocabulary filled with terms like summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. When I was 14, my mother gave birth to twins Jackson and Madison. From that moment on, it was as if a switch flipped inside her. The twins became the center of her universe, Richard's universe too. They transformed one of the mansion's 6 bedrooms into an elaborate nursery that looked like something out of a luxury magazine, complete with hand-painted murals and custom-made cribs that probably cost more than my dad's monthly salary. As the twins grew, so did my sense of being an outsider in what was supposed to be my home. My mother began referring to them as her perfect little family, right in front of me, as if I were simply an observer rather than her daughter. When Richard's wealthy friends came over for dinner parties, my mother would introduce the twins with glowing pride, while I was often mentioned as an afterthought, when I was mentioned at all. "And this is Evelyn, my daughter from my first marriage," she would say, with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. The way she said "first marriage" made it sound like a youthful indiscretion rather than 15 years of her life. Despite the growing distance, I tried desperately to maintain a connection with my mother. I offered to help with the twins, tried to engage her in conversations about school, and even attempted to show interest in the social events that now dominated her calendar. But with each passing month, she seemed less interested in my life and more absorbed in her new identity as Richard's wife and the twins' mother. My dad remained my rock throughout this tumultuous time. Though he now lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment that he could barely afford on his reduced income, the divorce had hit him hard financially. He never missed a weekend with me. He continued to nurture my love for technology, saving up to buy me programming books and even a laptop for my 15th birthday. Your brain is your greatest asset, Evie, he would tell me. No one can ever take away what you know. A particular memory stands out from when the twins were about 2 years old. Richard was hosting a lavish dinner to celebrate a major real estate deal. The dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, and caterers bustled about serving gourmet food. I sat quietly at the far end of the table while Richard and my mother showcased the twins who were dressed in matching designer outfits. Madison has already been accepted to the Brightwood preschool, my mother announced proudly to the table of Richard's business associates. It's the most exclusive in Seattle. There's a 2-year waiting list, but the director is a personal friend. Both twins are showing advanced development, Richard added. Jackson said his full alphabet at 18 months. As the guests cooed appropriately, one of Richard's colleagues turned to me. And what about you, young lady? What grade are you in now? Before I could answer, Richard cut in. Evelyn goes to the public high school. She takes after her father. Very technical-minded. The way he said it made it sound like a character flaw rather than a strength. My mother simply smiled and redirected the conversation back to the twins' accomplishments. I excused myself early from the table that night, and no one seemed to notice when I didn't return. As I entered my high school years, the tension in the house grew increasingly unbearable. Richard made no effort to hide his dislike of me, frequently making comments about how I was just like my father, and never in a complimentary way. She has that same stubborn streak, he would say to my mother when I disagreed with him about anything. No ambition beyond tinkering with computers just like him. What hurt more than Richard's obvious disdain was my mother's consistent siding with him. Any disagreement between Richard and me ended with her defending his position regardless of whether he was right or wrong. When I tried to talk to her privately about how I was feeling, she would dismiss my concerns. Richard has given us a wonderful life, Evelyn, she would say. The least you could do is show some gratitude instead of constantly challenging him. By the time I was 16, I had learned to make myself as invisible as possible in the house. I spent most of my time in my room diving deeper into programming as an escape from the reality of my family situation. I had few friends, partly because I was naturally introverted, and partly because I was embarrassed to invite anyone to a home where I was clearly unwanted. The incident that crystallized my position in the family occurred during the twins' 3rd birthday party. Richard and my mother had spared no expense hiring a professional party planner to transform the backyard into a circus-themed extravaganza, complete with a petting zoo performers and a custom carousel. Dozens of Richard's business associates and their families were invited along with my mother's new social circle. That morning, as caterers and decorators swarmed the house, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. Evelyn, Richard, and I think it would be best if you stayed in your room during the party, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Some important business associates of Richard's will be here, and we want to make a good impression. You want me to hide in my room during my own sibling's birthday party? I asked, stunned. Don't be dramatic, she replied. It's just that you and Richard have been clashing lately, and we can't afford any tension today. I'll bring you some cake later. I spent that day watching from my window as strangers celebrated in what was supposed to be my home. I saw my mother laughing and showing off the twins playing the role of perfect society wife and mother. Not once did she look up at my window. The final breaking point came just a few weeks after I turned 17. I was returning from the kitchen with a glass of water when I overheard Richard and my mother talking in his study. The door was slightly ajar, and I froze when I heard my name. We need to talk about Evelyn, Richard was saying. She's becoming more of a problem as she gets older. What do you want me to do? My mother asked, sounding tired. She's 17 now. Legally, she could live with her father full-time. It would be better for everyone, especially the twins. They need a stable environment without her constant moodiness. I expected, hoped, my mother would defend me. Instead, after a brief pause, she said, "I'll talk to her this weekend." 2 days later, my mother called me into the living room. Richard sat beside her on the sofa, his arm draped possessively over her shoulders. "Evelyn?" My mother began, her voice artificially cheerful. "We've been thinking about what's best for everyone, and we believe it would be better if you went to live with your father." Despite having overheard their conversation, hearing the words spoken directly to my face felt like a physical blow. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be dramatic," Richard interjected. "You're not being kicked out. We're simply suggesting a living arrangement that would benefit everyone, including you. You and your father have more in common anyway. We're planning to convert your room into a playroom for the twins," my mother added, as if this were a minor detail rather than confirmation that they wanted to erase all evidence of my existence. "They need more space as they grow." "How soon?" I managed to ask through the lump in my throat. My mother glanced at Richard before answering. "We were thinking this weekend would be good. It would give you time to pack your things without disrupting the twins' schedule." 48 hours. They were giving me 48 hours to pack up my life and leave the place that, despite everything, I still thought of as home. I called my father that night, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. Without hesitation, he said, "I'll come get you tomorrow, Evie. You can stay with me as long as you want." The next day, as my father loaded my belongings into his aging sedan, my mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. The twins were at a playdate conveniently scheduled during my departure. "This is for the best, Evelyn," she said as I approached to say goodbye. "You've been so unhappy here, and it's been affecting everyone." No apology, no acknowledgement that she was choosing her new family over her daughter. Just a reframing of the situation to make it seem like she was doing me a favor. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, fighting back tears. I wanted to hug her to feel some connection one last time, but her body language made it clear that she wasn't interested in an emotional farewell. As we drove away, my father reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss, Evie," he said softly. "Their tremendous loss." Moving into my dad's one-bedroom apartment was a stark change from the mansion I had just left. The living room, which would now double as my bedroom, barely fit a pull-out couch. The kitchen was so small that two people couldn't stand in it comfortably at the same time. And the entire place could have fit inside the master bedroom of Richard's house. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "It's not much," my dad apologized as he helped me set up the pull-out couch on that first night. "But we'll make it work." "It's perfect, Dad," I said, and I meant it. The apartment may have been small, but it was warm and welcoming in a way that the mansion, for all its grandeur, had never been. My dad immediately set about making space for me. He cleared out half his closet for my clothes, rearranged the living room to give me a desk for my computer, and put up shelves for my books and personal items. He worked extra hours to make sure we had enough money for groceries and other necessities, never once complaining about the additional financial burden of having me there full-time. Changing schools in my senior year was challenging. I had to leave behind the few friends I had made and navigate a new social environment while dealing with the emotional fallout of my mother's rejection. But there was also a sense of freedom in starting fresh, where no one knew my history or pitied me for my family situation. To help with expenses, I got a part-time job at a local computer repair shop after school. The owner, Mr. Chen, recognized my aptitude for technology and quickly gave me more responsibilities. Despite working 20 hours a week, I maintained excellent grades, determined to create a future for myself through education. During those first few months, I kept expecting my mother to call to check on me, to perhaps express some regret about how things had unfolded. But my phone remained silent. When I finally worked up the courage to call her after 2 months, the conversation was brief and superficial. How are the twins? I asked, hungry for any connection to my siblings. They're wonderful, she replied enthusiastically, launching into a detailed account of their latest achievements and activities. She didn't ask about my new school, my job, or how I was adjusting to living with my dad. When I tried to tell her about being selected for an advanced programming class, she interrupted to tell me she had to go because the twins' swimming instructor had arrived. As my senior year progressed, my dad encouraged me to apply to colleges, even though we both knew our financial situation was precarious. We'll figure it out, he promised. Don't limit yourself. I applied to several universities with strong computer science programs, including some that seemed financially out of reach. To my delight and relief, I received scholarship offers from multiple schools, including a substantial merit-based scholarship from my top choice. About a month before graduation, I returned to Richard's house to collect some remaining belongings that had been left behind in the hurried move. My mother had scheduled a time when the twins would be at a playdate and Richard would be at work. As I boxed up old books and mementos, my mother hovered nearby, making awkward small talk. Then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "It was very mature of you to choose to live with your father," she remarked. "Richard and I were surprised by your decision, but we respected it." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I didn't choose to leave. You and Richard told me I had to go." She frowned, looking genuinely confused. "That's not how I remember it. We discussed options and you decided you would be happier with your father." In that moment, I realized my mother had rewritten history to ease her own guilt. In her version of events, she wasn't a mother who had discarded her daughter. She was a supportive parent who had respected her child's wishes. It was a convenient narrative that absolved her of any responsibility or wrongdoing. I didn't argue with her. What would have been the point? She had created a reality in which she wasn't the villain of the story, and no amount of truth was going to change that. When I graduated high school with honors, my father sat proudly in the audience, cheering louder than anyone when my name was called. My mother didn't attend. She sent a generic card with a $50 check inside, and a note explaining that the twins had a preschool graduation ceremony the same day. That summer, as I prepared to leave for college, my dad helped me pack, despite being diagnosed with early-stage heart disease. He downplayed his condition, not wanting to worry me as I embarked on this new chapter of my life. "I'm just getting old, Evie," he insisted when I expressed concern about his frequent doctor appointments. "Nothing for you to worry about. You focus on your studies." As he drove me to campus that fall, he gave me the most valuable advice of my life. "Remember, Evelyn, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself and others. Your mother's choices are her burden to bear, not yours." College was a revelation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued the same things I did: knowledge, innovation, and the endless possibilities of technology. I declared a major in computer science and threw myself into my studies with an intensity born of determination and perhaps a desire to prove my worth. Financial reality meant that I couldn't just be a student. I worked multiple jobs throughout my college years. In the university computer lab as a teaching assistant for introductory programming courses and doing freelance web development on the side. Between work and classes, I often survived on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, but the exhaustion felt purposeful, productive. During my sophomore year, I developed my first app, a simple tool that helped students organize group projects and coordinate schedules. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was functional and filled a need. To my surprise, it gained popularity beyond my campus, with students at other universities downloading it and providing feedback for improvements. That same year, I took a class with Professor Williams, who would become my mentor and greatest advocate in the academic world. He recognized something in me that I hadn't fully acknowledged in myself. Not just technical skill, but innovative thinking. "You don't just solve problems, Evelyn," he told me after I presented a particularly complex project. "You anticipate them before they arise. That's a rare quality." Under his guidance, I expanded my knowledge beyond the standard curriculum, exploring emerging technologies and theoretical concepts that would later form the foundation of my startup. Throughout college, my relationship with my mother remained distant and strained. I would call her every few weeks, but our conversations followed a predictable pattern. Brief inquiries about my studies, quickly overshadowed by detailed updates about the twins and their apparently extraordinary achievements. Jackson was reading 2 years above grade level. Madison was showing remarkable talent in piano. They both had been accepted into an exclusive private elementary school. During my junior year, I landed a coveted internship at a major tech company in San Francisco. When I called to share the news with my mother, her response was tepid at best. "That's nice, Evelyn," she said before immediately shifting the conversation. "Did I tell you Jackson won the regional chess championship for his age group, Richards hiring a grandmaster to give him private lessons?" It became increasingly clear that my accomplishments would never elicit the same enthusiasm from her as the twins' activities. After a while, I stopped sharing my successes with her, protecting myself from the inevitable disappointment of her indifference. Meanwhile, my father's health was deteriorating more rapidly than he let on. During holiday visits home, I noticed his increasing fatigue, the new medications lined up on his bathroom counter, the way he needed to rest after even mild exertion. Yet whenever I expressed concern, he would change the subject, unwilling to burden me with his problems. "I'm fine, Evie," he would insist. "Tell me more about your internship." I graduated from college with highest honors, multiple job offers in hand. My father attended the ceremony despite having been hospitalized for heart problems just 2 weeks earlier. He sat in the audience with an oxygen tank beside him, refusing to let his health prevent him from witnessing this milestone. My mother didn't attend. The twins had a school recital that day, she explained in a text message sent the night before. She did, however, send a graduation card with a check for $100, double what she'd given me for high school graduation, as if her pride had also doubled. I accepted a position at a prestigious tech firm in Seattle, partly because the job was exciting and partly to be closer to my dad. Within 2 years, I had been promoted twice, earning a reputation as an innovative problem solver. But the corporate environment, with its politics and bureaucracy, felt increasingly constraining. In my spare time, I continued developing the idea that had taken root during my college years. A platform that would revolutionize how small businesses manage their online presence. I coded late into the night, refined my business plan, and saved every penny I could, living in a modest apartment and driving the same used car I'd had since college. My father, despite his worsening health, remained my greatest cheerleader. "You've got that spark, Evie," he would say during our weekly dinners. "The same one I saw when you were 10 years old, taking apart that old computer to see how it worked." During those years, contact with my mother dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional update email. The twins were growing up without knowing me, their half-sister relegated to the status of a distant acquaintance. And though it pained me, I had come to accept that this was how things would be. Little did I know that life had other plans. At 24, I made the leap that would change everything. I quit my corporate job to focus full-time on my startup. With my savings and a small investment from my father's retirement fund, which he insisted on providing, despite my protests, I rented a tiny office space and began the terrifying, exhilarating journey of entrepreneurship. The first year was brutal. There were nights I slept on an air mattress in my office because I had worked too late to drive home. There were moments of paralyzing doubt when I questioned whether I had made a catastrophic mistake. There were potential investors who dismissed my ideas because I was young, female, or both. But there were victories too. Small ones at first. A positive response to a prototype, a successful pitch to a local business, a mention in a tech blog. Then bigger ones. Securing seed funding from an angel investor who believed in my vision, hiring my first employee, landing our first major client. Through it all, my father's support never wavered, even as his health continued to decline. He didn't fully understand the technology behind my platform, but he understood me and my determination. Your mother always wanted security, he told me once. That's why she chose Richard. But you, Evie, you were born to create, not to settle. It was during this tumultuous period that I met Nathan at a tech conference in Portland. He was presenting on sustainable technology practices, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and quiet confidence. We exchanged business cards, began corresponding about potential collaborations, and gradually our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. Nathan was different from anyone I had dated before. He came from a close-knit family and initially couldn't comprehend the estrangement between my mother and me. But as he came to understand my history, he never pressured me to reconcile or suggested that I should get over it for my own sake, as some friends had done. Instead, he supported my boundaries and helped me recognize that my reluctance to trust wasn't a character flaw, but a reasonable response to past betrayal. 2 years after launching my company hit a tipping point. A major client signed on, bringing credibility and cash flow that allowed for rapid expansion. We grew from 5 employees to 20 in 6 months, then to 50 by the end of the 3rd year. Our user base expanded exponentially as word spread about the effectiveness of our platform. With financial stability came the opportunity to create a proper home for myself. I purchased a modest house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. Nothing like Richard's mansion, but comfortable, and most importantly, mine. One of my first actions was to convert the 2nd bedroom into a space for my father, who was now requiring regular medical care. "I can't ask you to do this, Evie," he protested when I suggested he move in. "You're young. You should be living your life, not taking care of your old man." "You took care of me when I needed it most," I reminded him. "Let me return the favor." Having him there was a blessing. Despite his illness, he maintained his gentle humor and unwavering support. He became a beloved figure at my company, occasionally visiting the office and charming my employees with his old-school engineering stories and genuine interest in their work. As the company continued to thrive, we caught the attention of a major tech conglomerate looking to acquire innovative startups. After months of negotiations, I agreed to an acquisition deal that valued the company at 8 figures, with the condition that I would remain as CEO with autonomy over operations. Overnight, I went from successful entrepreneur to wealthy businesswoman. A month after the acquisition, Business Insider published a profile of me and the company highlighting the rapid rise from startup to acquisition. The article included details about my background, my education, and my vision for the company's future. It did not, however, mention my mother or that side of my family, as I had specifically requested during the interview. 6 months ago, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss was devastating, a void that nothing could fill. He had been my constant, my North Star, the one person who had never failed me. At his funeral, attended by friends, former colleagues, and many of my employees, I spoke about his unwavering support and the quiet dignity with which he had faced life's challenges. My mother did not attend, nor did she send flowers or a card. When I called to inform her of his death, she expressed brief condolences before mentioning that the twins were busy preparing for high school entrance exams. I ended the call feeling hollow, any lingering hope of reconciliation fading like mist in the morning sun. In the months following my father's death, I threw myself into work, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of problem-solving and innovation. The company continued to grow, expanding into international markets and developing new features that further distinguished us from competitors. And then, unexpectedly, came a bright spot in my personal life. Nathan proposed during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands, presenting a simple but elegant ring and a promise to build a life together based on mutual respect and support. For the first time since my father's death, I felt a sense of hope for the future, a belief that family could mean something positive again. I was in this cautiously optimistic state when, after 10 years of virtual silence, my mother suddenly reappeared in my life. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. The subject line read simply, "Reaching out, your mother." My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. I opened it and began to read. Dearest Evelyn, it began with a familiarity that felt unearned. I hope this message finds you well. It's been far too long since we've had a proper conversation, and I find myself thinking about you often these days. The message continued with superficial inquiries about my life and brief updates about hers, written in a tone that suggested we had merely fallen out of touch, rather than experienced a profound rupture. Then came the real reason for the contact. I recently saw your profile in Business Insider. I can't express how proud I am of your accomplishments. You've clearly done very well for yourself. I would love to meet for coffee and catch up properly. There's so much to discuss after all these years. My initial reaction was a complex mix of emotions: wariness, anger, a flicker of long-buried hope. After consulting with Nathan and my therapist, I agreed to meet her at an upscale coffee shop downtown, choosing a public setting to contain whatever might unfold. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner that offered both visibility and some privacy. When my mother walked in, I was struck by how little she had changed. She was still slim and elegantly dressed, her hair now expertly colored to conceal any gray, her makeup flawless. She spotted me and approached with a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, leaning down to kiss my cheek before I could react. "You look wonderful." The first 15 minutes were filled with awkward small talk. She commented on my appearance, my choice of coffee, the unseasonably warm weather. I answered politely but briefly, waiting for her to reveal the true purpose of this reunion. Finally, after describing at length the twins' accomplishments in academics and extracurriculars, she got to the point. "The twins are 14 now," she said, stirring her latte. "They're at that crucial age where we need to start planning seriously for their future. Jackson is showing real promise in mathematics and science, and Madison is exceptionally gifted in languages and music." I nodded, wondering where this was heading. "Richard and I have always planned for them to attend St. Margaret's for high school. It's the most prestigious private school in the area with direct pathways to Ivy League universities," she continued. "And of course, we've always assumed they would attend top colleges. Jackson has his heart set on MIT and Madison is considering Yale or Princeton." Another pause, another stir of her latte. "The thing is, Evelyn Richards' business has faced some challenges in recent years. The real estate market hasn't been kind to him since the downturn." And there it was, the real reason for our reunion. "We're finding ourselves in a position where the twins' educational future isn't as secure as we'd like it to be," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "When I saw that article about your success, I thought perhaps this was an opportunity for you to help your siblings achieve their dreams." I sat there stunned by the audacity. After 10 years of near total silence after kicking me out at 17, my mother's first substantive contact was to ask for money. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to pay for the twins to attend private high school and then Ivy League colleges?" She brightened, apparently mistaking my clarification for interest. "Exactly. It would be such a wonderful thing for you to do as their big sister. Family supporting family." "Family?" I repeated the word, feeling bitter on my tongue. "You're talking about family obligations." "Well, yes," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "They are your siblings, after all." "Half-siblings I barely know because you chose to exclude me from their lives," I pointed out. My mother's expression hardened. "That's not fair, Evelyn. You were the one who chose to leave and live with your father. We didn't force you out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, you literally told me I had to leave. You gave me 48 hours to pack. You converted my room into a playroom before I was even gone. You're exaggerating, she said dismissively. You were a difficult teenager going through a phase. Richard and I simply suggested that living with your father might be better for everyone, and you agreed. I took a deep breath, struggling to maintain my composure. Did you come to Dad's funeral? I asked, changing tack. She looked taken aback by the question. I couldn't. The twins had important exams that week, and Richard was in the middle of a critical business negotiation. Right, I said. And during his illness, the 3 years he was sick, did you visit him once? Call to check on him? Your father and I were divorced, Evelyn, she said stiffly. It wasn't my place to— He was the father of your child, I interrupted. He raised me alone after you decided I didn't fit into your perfect new life. And now you want me to fund the educations of children I've barely been allowed to know. Her face flushed with anger. Now you're being childish. This isn't about the past. It's about the twins' future. They deserve the best education possible. And I didn't, I asked quietly. That was different, she insisted. Your father could afford community college, and you got those scholarships. The twins have different prospects, different needs. I noticed that people at nearby tables were beginning to glance our way as my mother's voice rose. I lowered mine deliberately. What exactly did Richard's financial troubles have to do with attending my father's funeral? I asked. She waved a hand dismissively. You're deliberately missing the point. This isn't about your father or the past. It's about your brother and sister needing your help now. The brother and sister who don't know me? The ones I wasn't allowed to develop a relationship with? Those siblings? My mother's patience was clearly wearing thin. If you're so concerned about knowing them, this would be an excellent opportunity to develop a relationship. Support their education, be part of their lives. On your terms, I noted, when it's convenient for you, when you need something from me. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked, she said, gathering her purse. I thought you would have matured beyond this teenage resentment by now. I came to you in good faith, mother to daughter, asking for help for your siblings. You came to me because you saw an article that mentioned my company's valuation. I corrected her. If I were still working at my first job out of college, would you have reached out? She stood up, looking down at me with a mixture of disappointment and anger. I can see this was a mistake, but think about it, Evelyn. If you don't help your siblings, what does that say about you? Are you really going to punish them for whatever grievances you're holding on to about the past? I remained seated oddly calm in the face of her escalating emotion. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm maintaining the boundaries that you established a decade ago. Well, I hope you can live with yourself, she said, her voice rising again. If you don't help your siblings, you're dead to me. The irony of her statement hit me like a physical force. I looked up at her, meeting her gaze steadily. I've been dead to you since I was 17, Mom. This changes nothing. She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps expecting me to cave to apologize to offer money after all. When I didn't, she turned and stormed out of the café, leaving her half-finished latte on the table. I sat there alone, surrounded by curious glances from other patrons, feeling a strange mixture of pain and clarity. The encounter had been difficult, but it had also confirmed what I had suspected for years in my mother's eyes. I had never been valuable for who I was, only for what I could provide. The aftermath of the confrontation with my mother left me emotionally drained, but oddly at peace. The fantasy I had occasionally indulged, that she might someday recognize her mistakes and genuinely seek reconciliation, had been definitively laid to rest. There was a certain freedom in that clarity, painful though it was. When I arrived home that evening, Nathan was waiting with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a patient ear. As I recounted the encounter, his outrage on my behalf was tempered with genuine concern for my well-being. Are you okay? He asked when I finished. That's a lot to process. I am actually, I said, realizing it was true. It hurts, but it's also a relief to have confirmation that I haven't been misremembering or exaggerating what happened. Her version of events is so different from reality that it's almost laughable. Gaslighting at its finest, Nathan observed. Making you question your own memories to absolve herself of guilt. Over the next few days, I received a series of text messages from my mother, alternating between guilt trips. I can't believe you would abandon your own siblings, and grudging apologies. Perhaps I was too harsh, but you need to understand the pressure we're under. I didn't respond to any of them, maintaining the boundary I had established at the café. Then about a week after our meeting, I began receiving messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Hi, Evelyn, this is Jackson. Mom gave me your number. I wanted to say hi and that I hope we can meet sometime. And shortly after, Evelyn, it's Madison. Mom told us you're our sister and that you're really successful. That's cool. Maybe we could talk. My first instinct was suspicion. Had my mother put them up to this as another manipulation tactic? But as I read and reread the messages, they seemed genuine in their awkwardness. These weren't polished requests for financial support. They were tentative reaching out from teenagers who had just learned they had a half-sister they barely knew. After careful consideration, I replied to both, suggesting we meet for lunch that weekend at a casual restaurant near their home. I was nervous about the meeting, unsure what my mother had told them about me, or what expectations they might have. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted them immediately. A boy and girl with features that reminded me partly of my mother and partly of Richard. They looked up anxiously as I approached, and I was struck by how young and vulnerable they seemed, despite their designer clothes and carefully styled hair. Hi, I said, sliding into the booth across from them. I'm Evelyn. It's good to meet you properly. The conversation was stilted at first. They asked about my job, and I gave them a simplified explanation of what my company did. I asked about school, and they mentioned some of their classes and activities. But as the meal progressed, something unexpected happened. They began to open up about their own frustrations with our mother. She's super controlling, Madison confided, picking at her salad. Everything has to be perfect all the time. My friends can't come over unless the house is spotless and we're all dressed like we're going to a photo shoot. And the pressure about college is insane, Jackson added. I'm 14, but she's already making me take SAT prep courses every Saturday. When I said I might want to take a gap year after high school to travel, she acted like I'd suggested becoming a drug dealer. I listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a side of my mother I recognized all too well, but surprised that the twins, her perfect children, were experiencing similar pressures to those I had faced. Did she tell you why we're meeting? I asked cautiously. They exchanged glances. She said you might be able to help with our college funds, Madison admitted, but also that you're our sister and we should know you. She talked about you sometimes, Jackson added. Usually when she was comparing us to you, like Evelyn was never this disobedient, or Evelyn would have appreciated this opportunity. I almost laughed at the irony. All those years I had been the imperfect child, the one who didn't fit. And now my mother was using me as an example to control her real children. Look, I said carefully, I want to be honest with you both. Our mother and I have a complicated history. She and Richard asked me to leave when I was 17, and we've had very little contact since then. Their eyes widened. She told us you chose to live with your dad, Madison said. That's not what happened, I replied gently. But that's between me and her. What I want you both to know is that none of this is your fault, and I don't hold any of it against you. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, sharing stories and gradually building a tentative connection. They were bright, thoughtful teenagers struggling under the weight of impossible expectations, a feeling I knew all too well. Before we parted, I made a decision. About college, I said. "I'm not comfortable giving money directly to Mom and Richard, but I am willing to set up a trust for each of you that will become available when you turn 18. It will cover your education at whatever school you choose, Ivy League or not." Their faces lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Really?" Jackson asked. "Even if I don't want to go to MIT?" "Even if you want to study poetry in a tiny liberal arts college," I confirmed. "The money will be for you to use for your education as you see fit, not as Mom and Richard dictate." It was a gesture that felt right, supporting my siblings without enabling my mother's controlling behavior. The twins and I exchanged contact information, with a promise to stay in touch independently of our mother. When my mother learned of my decision, she was furious that I had circumvented her authority. "How dare you undermine us with the twins?" she fumed in a voicemail. "Setting up trusts they can access without our approval. They're children." I didn't respond to her message, but I did continue to build my relationship with Jackson and Madison through occasional lunches, text messages, and even helping Jackson with a coding project for school. It was a delicate balance, developing connections with them without getting drawn back into my mother's toxic orbit. Throughout this tumultuous period, therapy became my lifeline. Working with a therapist who specialized in family trauma, I began to process not just the recent confrontation, but the years of rejection and gaslighting that had preceded it. I came to understand that my mother's behavior reflected her own insecurities and limitations, not my worth as a person or a daughter. As Nathan and I began planning our wedding, I faced the difficult question of whether to invite my mother and Richard. Ultimately, I decided against it, though I did include the twins in the small, intimate ceremony we were planning. It was a boundary that felt healthy and necessary, prioritizing genuine connection over obligatory family ties. My father's absence was a palpable void as we planned the celebration. He should have been there to walk me down the aisle, to dance at the reception, to welcome Nathan officially into the family. But I found ways to honor his memory throughout the process, incorporating his favorite music and placing a single chair in the front row with his photograph. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on the contrast between my father's unconditional love and my mother's conditional acceptance. My father, with his modest means and humble apartment, had given me the most valuable gift possible: the unwavering belief that I was worthy of love exactly as I was. My mother, with all her wealth and social connections, had never been able to offer that same assurance. To honor my father's legacy and to help others who might be facing similar challenges, I established a scholarship foundation for students from broken homes. The James Parker Scholarship would provide financial support and mentoring to young people who, like me, needed to know that their worth wasn't determined by a parent's rejection. As for forgiveness, that complicated, much-discussed concept, I came to my own understanding of what it meant in the context of my relationship with my mother. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation or pretending the hurt never happened. It didn't mean allowing her back into my life on the same terms as before. Instead, forgiveness meant releasing the hope for a different past and accepting what was rather than what I wished could have been. I forgave my mother not for her sake, but for my own peace of mind. And with that forgiveness came the freedom to build boundaries that protected my well-being while still allowing for compassion from a distance. Today, as I look at the life I've built, a successful career, a loving partnership with Nathan, a tentative but growing relationship with my half-siblings, and a circle of friends who have become chosen family, I see the truth in my father's words from long ago. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself and others. My mother's rejection was never a reflection of my value. It was and remains a reflection of her limitations. And in recognizing that truth, I finally found the closure I had been seeking for so long. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who only reached out when they needed something? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember that sometimes the healthiest family is the one you build yourself, not the one you're born into. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength and peace on your own journey toward healing.